I never thought I'd hear those words from my mother's mouth. "She's just a burden," she whispered to my dad, thinking I couldn't hear them from the kitchen. Those 5 words pierced my heart like daggers. My name is Emma, and I've always been the black sheep of my family. While my siblings excelled in everything they did, I struggled with a learning disability that made school a nightmare. My parents never tried to understand. They just labeled me as lazy and difficult. When I met Richard at a friend's party 6 years ago, it felt like the universe was finally giving me a break. He was successful, kind, and for some reason, he saw something in me that even I couldn't see. Despite my family's skepticism, we fell deeply in love and got married 2 years later. Richard came from wealth, but he was the most down-to-earth person I'd ever met. He worked as a financial advisor for a prestigious firm in New York, but you'd never know it from his humble demeanor. My family, especially my parents, couldn't understand what he saw in me. They would make snide remarks when they thought I wasn't listening, questioning his judgment and suggesting he could do better. It had been 3 years since we last visited my parents' home in Connecticut. The sprawling colonial house where I grew up had always felt cold to me, despite its picture-perfect appearance. But Richard insisted we should try to mend fences, especially since my father had recently recovered from a heart attack. "Family is important, Emma," he'd said, "no matter how difficult they can be." So there we were, sitting in my parents' immaculate living room with its crystal chandelier and antique furniture that no one was allowed to touch when I was growing up. My mother, Elizabeth, was still the perfect hostess, offering expensive wine and making small talk as if we were guests she needed to impress rather than her daughter and son-in-law. My father, Jonathan, a retired surgeon with salt and pepper hair and perpetually judgmental eyes, mostly asked Richard about work and investments. Not once did he ask about my life or my job at the children's library that I loved so much. I excused myself to get some water from the kitchen when I overheard my mother's whispered words to my father, "I don't know why Richard stays with her. She's just a burden. No career, no ambition, no children yet. What does he see in her?" My father's response was equally cutting. "Maybe he feels sorry for her. You know how those wealthy types sometimes need a charity case to feel good about themselves." I froze, the glass of water trembling in my hand. Years of therapy had helped me build some resilience against their criticism, but this cut deeper than anything before. I was about to turn around and leave, pack our bags and never come back, when I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. It was Richard. The look in his eyes told me he had heard everything, but instead of anger, I saw determination and love. He took the glass from my shaking hand, placed it on the counter, and whispered, "It's time they knew the truth, Emma. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." Before I could ask what he meant, he took my hand and led me back to the living room. My parents straightened up, plastering fake smiles on their faces, as if they hadn't just been tearing me down. "Jonathan, Elizabeth," Richard began, his voice steady and confident, "I've been meaning to share some news with you." My mother's eyes lit up, probably hoping for a grandchild announcement. My father leaned forward, always interested in anything Richard had to say. "I've recently made some significant financial decisions," Richard continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, "and I wanted you to be among the first to know." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to my father. "This is a copy of the deed to our new estate in Westchester County. It's a beautiful property. 7 acres, a historic main house, guest cottage, and even a small apple orchard." My father's eyes widened as he opened the envelope, clearly impressed. My mother moved to sit beside him, peering at the document with unveiled interest. "It's quite valuable," Richard continued casually, "worth about $12 million, according to the last appraisal." My parents looked up in shock, then back down at the paper. That's when my father's expression changed from impressed to confused. "But this deed," he began, his brow furrowing as he read more carefully. "Yes?" Richard smiled, placing his arm around my waist. "It's in Emma's name, only Emma's name." The silence that filled the room was deafening. My father's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before, while my mother's mouth hung open in disbelief. I was equally stunned, staring at Richard with questions in my eyes. "What do you mean it's only in Emma's name?" My father finally sputtered, looking at the deed again as if the name might change if he stared hard enough. Richard's smile never faltered. "Exactly what I said, Jonathan. The estate is Emma's. I've put it entirely in her name." "But why?" my mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The implication was clear. Why would anyone give me, the family disappointment, something so valuable? "Because," Richard said, his voice gaining an edge I rarely heard, "Emma is the most deserving person I know. She works tirelessly helping children discover the joy of reading, despite having struggled with dyslexia her entire life, something you both dismissed as laziness." My parents had the decency to look ashamed for a moment, but Richard wasn't finished. "And because, contrary to what you just said in the kitchen, Emma is not a burden. She's the light of my life. She's the reason I wake up happy every morning. And she's the reason I've been able to build my own investment firm that's now managing over $1 billion in assets," I gasped. Richard had been working on starting his own firm, but he hadn't told me it had become so successful. He had always been modest about his achievements, never wanting to make me feel insecure about our financial disparity. "What do you mean?" I asked him, momentarily forgetting my parents were there. Richard turned to me, his eyes soft. "Remember those investment strategies I was developing 2 years ago? The ones you helped me simplify so they'd be more accessible to average people, not just the ultra-wealthy?" I nodded. I had spent weeks helping him rewrite his complex financial jargon into language anyone could understand, drawing on my experience, explaining difficult concepts to children at the library. "Well, those strategies are what set my firm apart. They're why we've grown so quickly. Your contribution was invaluable, Emma. You're the reason for my success." My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. That's wonderful news, Richard. We're very proud of you both." The insincerity in his voice was palpable. My mother, ever the social navigator, tried to salvage the situation. "Of course we are. And we've always known Emma has certain talents. We just worried about her practical future." "Oui." She reached for my hand across the coffee table, but I pulled away. "No, Mom. You've never believed in me. Neither of you have." The words I'd held back for decades finally spilled out. "You made me feel worthless because I couldn't live up to your impossible standards. You made me believe I was stupid because my brain works differently." Richard squeezed my hand supportively as I continued. But Richard saw me, really saw me, from the very beginning. He values what I bring to the table, even when it's different from what others might offer. My father, never one to accept criticism, began to protest, but Richard cut him off. "There's more," he said, pulling another document from his pocket. "This is the title to this house, your house." My parents looked at each other in alarm. "What about our house?" my father demanded. "The bank called me last month," Richard explained calmly. "They were about to foreclose on this property. It seems your financial situation has been precarious since your medical practice faced those malpractice lawsuits, Jonathan." My father's face drained of color. I had no idea about any of this. They had kept their financial troubles hidden, maintaining the facade of success at all costs. "I paid off your mortgage," Richard continued. "The house is secure. But I want you both to remember something every time you walk through these doors. The only reason you still have this home is because of the daughter you've always seen as a burden." My mother began to cry, mascara running down her perfectly made-up face. My father looked as if he might have another heart attack. "Emma had no obligation to help you after how you've treated her," Richard said, his voice gentler now. "But when I told her about your situation, do you know what she said?" My parents stared at Richard, then at me, waiting for him to continue. The living room that had once intimidated me now felt smaller somehow, as if the truth had shrunk the space between us. She said, "We have to help them, Richard. They're still my parents." Richard's voice was quiet, but firm. "Emma didn't hesitate for a second, despite everything you've put her through." My father's hands trembled slightly as he set down the documents on the coffee table. For the first time in my life, I saw something I never thought I'd see in his eyes. Vulnerability. We didn't know about the business success," my mother stammered, trying to regain her composure. "You've always been so private about your finances, Richard." "That's not the point, Elizabeth," Richard replied. "The point is that you've never seen your daughter's value with or without money. You've never appreciated her kindness, her creativity, her resilience, or her intelligence, just because it doesn't look like what you expected." I took a deep breath, finding courage I didn't know I had. "All my life I've tried to earn your approval. I thought if I just worked hard enough or achieved the right things, you'd finally see me. But now I realize that was never going to happen, because the problem wasn't me. It was your narrow definition of success." My father cleared his throat, his surgeon's hands fidgeting with his wedding band, a nervous habit I'd noticed since childhood. "Emma, you have to understand. We only wanted what was best for you. We pushed you because the world is harsh, and we didn't want you to struggle." "But I did struggle, Dad," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I struggled every day in your house, feeling like I was never good enough. Do you know what that does to a child?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom my father had inherited, ticked loudly, marking the seconds of this long overdue confrontation. Finally, my mother spoke. "Why didn't you tell us about your condition, the learning disability Richard mentioned?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I did tell you, Mom, multiple times. My teachers told you, the school counselor told you. But you and Dad decided it was just an excuse for not trying hard enough." My father's face flushed with what might have been shame. "We thought we were helping you by not accepting excuses." "It wasn't an excuse," I said firmly. "It was a reality I had to face every day, and I faced it alone." Richard, who had been quiet for a moment, added, "Emma taught herself different ways to learn and comprehend. She developed incredible strategies that most people would never think of. That's why she's so effective at the library. She can connect with children who struggle because she understands them in a way most educators don't." My mother dabbed at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. "I didn't know your work was so meaningful." "You never asked," I replied simply. The conversation paused as my father got up and walked to the liquor cabinet in the corner of the room. He poured himself a scotch, something he rarely did before evening. His hand shook slightly as he raised the glass to his lips. "How bad are the lawsuits?" I asked, breaking the silence. My father looked surprised by the direct question. He took another sip before answering. 3 patients claimed negligence after complications from surgeries. The medical board cleared me of wrongdoing, but the legal fees..." He trailed off, looking older than his 68 years. "The practice's insurance wasn't enough," my mother added quietly. "We had to use our savings, then take out a second mortgage. We didn't want anyone to know." "Pride," Richard murmured. "It can be expensive." My father nodded slowly, a gesture that must have cost him dearly. "Yes, pride has cost me more than money." He looked at me directly for what felt like the first time. "It cost me my relationship with my daughter." The admission hung in the air between us. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was unprecedented. "The lawsuits aren't the only issue," my mother admitted, her social facade crumbling further. "Your father's heart condition. The treatments aren't fully covered by insurance. The specialists, the medications, it's been overwhelming." I felt a complex mix of emotions, anger at their treatment of me over the years, but also a daughter's instinctive concern for her parents' well-being. "Why didn't you ask for help?" I questioned. My father laughed bitterly. "Ask for help from the daughter we dismissed? From the son-in-law whose career choices we'd questioned, our pride wouldn't allow it. Richard stood up and walked to the large bay window overlooking the front garden. The garden my mother had always kept immaculately manicured to impress the neighbors. "The financial assistance comes with conditions," he said, turning back to face my parents. My father straightened his posture, the defensive wall beginning to rebuild. "What kind of conditions?" "The condition is simple," Richard said, returning to sit beside me on the sofa. "Respect. Real respect for Emma, not just the appearance of it when it's convenient." My father's jaw tightened. Even facing financial ruin, his pride was fighting back. But my mother placed her hand on his arm, a silent communication passing between them after decades of marriage. "We can do that," she said, looking at me with what seemed like genuine remorse in her eyes. "We should have done that all along." My father nodded stiffly but said nothing. "There's something else you should know," I said, deciding that this moment of truth should be complete. "Richard and I are expecting a baby." My mother's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. For once, she seemed genuinely speechless. "You're pregnant?" my father asked, as if he couldn't quite process the information. I nodded, feeling Richard's arm tighten protectively around my waist. 4 months along. We wanted to wait until we were past the first trimester to tell anyone, especially after... I paused, the memory still painful. After the miscarriage last year. "Miscarriage," my mother echoed. "You never told us. Would you have cared?" The question escaped before I could stop it, harsher than I intended. The hurt that flashed across my mother's face seemed genuine. "Of course we would have, Emma. You're our daughter." We've never felt like you wanted to share your life with us," my father admitted quietly, "and perhaps we gave you reason to keep your distance." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. I decided to accept it for what it was. "The baby is why we bought the estate in Westchester," Richard explained. "We wanted more space, fresh air, a good school district. Emma's already designing the nursery." "A grandchild," my mother whispered, a small smile forming on her lips. "I never thought that I'd be capable of raising a child," I finished for her. She had the grace to look ashamed. "That's not what I meant. We'd given up hope of grandchildren. Your brother and his wife have decided not to have children, and your sister is too focused on her career." I completed the familiar refrain. My sister, the brilliant surgeon, following in our father's footsteps, had made it clear that children weren't in her 5-year plan. "Do you know if it's a boy or girl?" my father asked, his voice softer than usual. "A girl," Richard answered, smiling at me. "And she's going to be just as amazing as her mother." For the first time that day, I saw my father smile. A real smile, not the tight, controlled expression he usually wore. "A granddaughter," he said, almost to himself. "We'd like her to know her grandparents," I said carefully, "but only if you can accept her for whoever she turns out to be. If she struggles in school, if she's different in any way, I won't let her grow up feeling like she's not enough." My parents exchanged a look. Decades of unspoken communication passing between them. My mother was the first to respond. "We've made mistakes, Emma. Terrible mistakes in how we raised you. We were so focused on what we thought success should look like that we couldn't see the wonderful person you were becoming." She reached for my hand again, and this time, I didn't pull away. "Please give us a chance to do better with our granddaughter." My father stood up and walked to the fireplace, running his hand along the mantel where photographs of our family stood in silver frames. I noticed for the first time that there were very few of me compared to my siblings' achievements and milestones. "I was wrong," he said finally, his back still to us. The words seemed physically painful for him to say. "About you, Emma. About what matters in life." He turned to face us, his expression more open than I'd ever seen it. "The heart attack. It changes your perspective, makes you realize what you've taken for granted." He walked over to where Richard and I sat, and to my complete shock, he knelt down in front of me, his knees cracking slightly with the effort. My proud father, on his knees. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'm asking for the chance to earn it, to be the father I should have been, and to be a grandfather who sees your daughter for exactly who she is." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at this broken version of my always perfect father. I placed my hand on his cheek, a gesture of affection I couldn't remember ever initiating before. "I'd like that," I said softly. "It won't be easy and it won't happen overnight, but I'd like to try." My mother joined us, kneeling beside my father despite her expensive silk dress. "We'll do better, Emma. I promise." As Richard helped my parents back to their feet, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it, the beginning of healing. Later that evening, as Richard and I prepared to leave, my mother handed me a small, worn box. "This was my grandmother's," she explained. "I've been saving it for you, for the right moment." Inside was a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched. "Open it," she urged. Inside was a tiny photograph of me as a child, smiling broadly, missing my front teeth, my hair in messy pigtails. I looked so happy, so unaware of the struggles that would come. "I've carried this picture with me for years," my mother admitted quietly, "even when I couldn't understand you, or when I was most disappointed in what I perceived as your failures. I kept this reminder of the joy you brought into our lives." As Richard drove us away from my childhood home, I held the locket in my palm, feeling its weight, not just of silver but of history, of hurt, and perhaps now, of hope. "Are you okay?" Richard asked, reaching for my hand. I looked back at the house, growing smaller in the side mirror. "I think I will be," I answered honestly. "We all will be."